Hi, this is Jeff Curto, and welcome to episode number 165 of Camera Position, the podcast about the creative side of photography. Well, I'm not even really sure where to start this episode of Camera Position because I've just been mulling over stuff in my head today about how confounding photography has become. How confusing it must be, especially for those people who are just picking up a camera for the first time and are confronted with this barrage of information about photography, about how to do photography, about what to do in photography, about what not to do in photography. I just went around the web and I picked up a number of headlines from some photo websites, including how to successfully photograph cityscapes, 14 practical reasons your photos are not quite as good as you want them to be, 6 things to avoid for better street photos, how to use your eyes to create better black and white images. That last one, man, I wanted to click on that one. How to use your eyes to create better black and white images. And I just was looking at all of this and thinking about the fact that so many photographers today are so tremendously compelled by their stuff, the gear that they use, the equipment that they use, what kind of camera, what type of lens, how many pixels can dance on the head of a pin, and man, it's just a frustrating environment, I think, for especially people who are new-ish to photography. And even for those of us who've been in photography for a long time, the options now are so great. Should I use my cell phone to take pictures? Should I use my DSLR to take pictures? And of course, I sort of think that the answer is yes. Yes, you should. You should use whatever the camera you happen to have with you. That whole the best camera is the one that you have with you motivation for photography. And as a listener, longtime listener, John Badgerow once wrote to me, he said, photos need to be taken to be any good. Photos need to be taken to be any good. John, I've held that thing in my hand for quite a long time, figuring out where it is that I could use it in camera position. And I think about it all the time when I'm not making photographs and when I'm seeing these web links to, how to use your eyes to create better black and white images. So I guess what I wanted to talk about with this particular episode of Camera Position was the idea that you've got to get out there and make pictures. It is the making of the photographs that actually teaches you about making photographs. Try all the options. Find out what works. In these days of digital photography, gosh, it just makes so much sense to just stand there and see what happens if you take a picture of a moving object at all the shutter speeds that exist. Take it back. You've got software that tells you what shutter speed is what, and find out what happens. And I know that probably a number of you are, and if you're not, you really should be listening to my dear friend Ibarionex Perello's podcast, The Candid Frame, where he interviews photographers. And I think most of them all say the same thing, that what they're looking for is to sort of just forget about the gear. And in fact, even in Ibarionex's tremendous book, and I'll put a link to this book and to his podcast on the cameraposition.com blog page. But Ibarionex wrote a book a few years back called Chasing the Light. Chasing the Light. And in that book, he has a little section toward the end when he's talked a lot about all different sorts of primarily available light photography, and it's a very inspirational book. I really recommend it, and certainly recommend listening to his podcast. And I know there are probably a number of you who are out there listening to me who also listen to him. And, he's talking here about getting the gear out of the way. Get the gear out of the way. And he said, my new sensibility made me less dependent on owning and using the latest equipment and software. Instead, I focused on the equipment that I already had, and I tried to master it. I didn't need to understand every bell and whistle. I just had to come to grips with those controls and features that were the most important in my effort to capture images that expressed how I felt. So, forget your gear. Get rid of the gear. Get the gear out of the way, as Ibarionex would say, and get rid of this idea that you can learn how to do photography by reading an article that says 6 things to avoid for better street photos. And if you're the author of that article, I apologize. And I understand that, the title of the article has the intention of trying to get people to click on the blog and so forth and so on. But 6 things to avoid for better street photos. What happens if you don't avoid them? My sensibility would say go out and do those 6 things. I haven't read the article, so unless there's something really dangerous, right? So photos need to be taken to be any good. So make the pictures, try the gizmos on your camera, find out what it does, figure out how to make the pictures that express the thing that you feel about that spot in time, that place in your camera's viewfinder. Thanks for listening. I really appreciate that you're here. I'm sorry that this is perhaps a little more oddball episode of Camera Position, but I couldn't help myself to talk about the idea that you've got to get out there and make photographs. So I'll see you out in the field, and I'll see you in the next episode of Camera Position, the podcast about the creative side of photography.